Hello and welcome to the first part of this first-person shooter character tutorial series. Just like in the third-person character, we're going to be going over a basic setup for a custom first-person character. Now, I've just loaded up a first-person template, and as we can see, we get a gun that shoots a projectile. We're going to be doing a line trace projectile though. So if you don't know what that is, it's basically we'll be shooting an invisible line out from the center of our camera, and we'll be using that to detect whether we've hit something. Right now it's set up with a projectile, and what I'll be using to set that up is this first-person assault pack. Now I believe I got this free with Unreal's free stuff for the month, but I'm not sure if it is just free on the marketplace. So if you just go onto the marketplace and have a look, if you can't get hold of this pack, you can follow along with any set of floating arms and set of guns. It's just in here we've got some particle effects like for the bullets, for the bullet casings, and for the muzzle flash. But if you don't have those, you can still follow along using this basic template, and you're still going to get something from it. So with that all said, I'm going to make a start. So as you can see, I've got my first person assault pack in here, and in a bit we'll go and have a look at all the animations we've got in there. But for starters, I'm just going to create a new folder, and I'm going to call it player, and then I'm going to go in there and I'm going to create another folder called blueprints, and then I'm going to open up that folder, and I'm going to create a blueprint class, a character, and I'm going to call this player_BP. Hit enter, open that up, and we're going to get a empty character blueprint which we are going to use to create our character. So initially if we were setting this up in third person, what we do at this point is we'd get this mesh, the inherited mesh, and we would add our skeletal mesh asset to it. But because we want to have our floating arm mesh parented to our camera, we can't do it with this. We're going to have to just add in a skeletal mesh. Okay, so what I'm going to do is just add a skeletal mesh. I'm going to call this, rename, I'm going to call this FPS_arms. And then I'm going to add the skeletal mesh here. So we've got SK, so I've got SK custom arms. Now if you're just following along with the mannequin, you can just go into, you can just open up this character, and you don't really need to follow along with this part because you can see they don't have anything on that inherited mesh, but they have a first person camera, and then the mesh is inherited to that. So that's the setup we're going to do. Now while we're here, no, we'll grab that in a minute. We'll do it in order. Okay, so we've got our arms, but actually we want a camera. So we need a camera as well. So I'm going to click on the mesh. Well, it doesn't, in fact, I'm not going to click on anything, just so that it's not going to inherit. And then I'm going to type camera. Okay, and you can see now that that is actually inherited. I think it's all inherited to the mesh, which is probably not what we want. I think what we want to do is, yeah, disinherit that by clicking onto it, and then drag the first person arms onto the camera like that. So now when we add the arms in a minute, just Control Z to undo that. Just going to move the camera back and up a little bit, because what we can do, if you haven't already, open up your first person camera and go to the viewport, and we can use this as a template for what we want. So we want the camera raised up a little bit. Go to the first person arms, and in my case I want the SK arms custom, or custom arms, sorry. And I'm just going to disinherit the arms while I place them, because if you don't, you can have problems sometimes. So I'm just going to drag that down, rotate it 90 degrees. Okay, and if we go back and have a look at the first person character, we can see that it isn't set up perfectly in the middle. It's set up slightly to the right. So let's go and do that on ours. So let's move the arms slightly to the right so it's more like that. Now we can come back in later and play around with that, but for now we're just going to leave it like that. Okay, because we need to go and set up an animation blueprint and everything. And in a bit as well, we need to come back in here and set up a space for the gun to go. But for now, we're just going to leave it like that. So I'm going to hit compile, and then I'm going to come over to my first person character blueprint, and I'm going to open his event graph, and I'm going to grab this movement code, this mouse input code, and this jump code. So I'm going to grab this, I'm going to hold control and hit C, and come over to the player's blueprint, open up the event graph, just delete that, and then hold control and V. That gives us our mouse input and our jump. And then we want to grab this movement code. And then hold Control C. Come over here, Control V, and there we go. So hit compile. And then we've got some errors because it's referencing the first person camera. So all we need to do is bring in our camera for there, delete those two. Plug them into the relevant places, which I believe that was. Let's quickly go right. Yeah, it was in the top one on both. Alright, so compile. Now what I want to do is come over to the viewport again. We don't have to do this from the viewport, but come over to player BP, and up here type POSS for possession or auto possess player, and instead of disable, set that to 0. Hit compile. Delete the first person character. Oops, no, I don't want to see it tried to delete the blueprint there. Just make sure you've selected that and just hit delete, because we just want to delete it out of the layout, not from the files. Drag in our guy, hit play. Okay, so we can't see our arms, but we can move around. We can't look up and down, so let's go and fix that. So click on your player, click on the is it right, just delete where it says POSS for possession, and then we want the no, it isn't there. Where is it? It's in the camera. Okay, use pawn control rotation on the camera and hit play, and now when we can see around now, but our arms are not apparently inherited to our camera, so that is why we did that setup in the beginning. So now we inherit our arms to the camera by just dragging it onto the camera. Hit compile, hit play, and we can see, but I just think our arms are too far into the camera, or too close to the camera. But also we don't have any animations or anything, so we probably won't be able to see just yet. Okay, something seems to be weird there, but I'm going to go and set up the animation blueprint, and then we'll see what problems we've got. So in here, in the player content folder, I'm going to create a new folder called animations, and I'm going to open that up, and then I'm going to create a animation blend space. So not the 1D, the 2D, so the blend space. It's going to be for the SK arms. If you're just doing it, it'll be for just the first person arms, the standard one, if you're following along. But you don't really have to do this if you're just following along using the basic setup, the basic mesh and stuff that already comes with the first person template. So I'm going to call this player underscore BS, and I'm going to open it up. And then this is a really simple one, because I've worked with this set before, and it doesn't have a backwards or side walking animation. So we're just going to use the walk forward for everything, and that'll make sense in a minute. So open up the horizontal axis and the vertical axis. For the horizontal axis, we want to type direction, and the minimum wants to be -180, and the maximum wants to be 180, so we get the full 360. Grid divisions, I'm going to set to 12. And interpolation time to 0.2. And then the next one is speed. Now it's -600 for when he's walking backwards at full speed, and 600 for when he's walking forward at full speed. We'll go 12 grid divisions again. Interpolation time 0.2. So now if I drag this, is that 0, 0 right in the center? Or in fact, I think we need 14 grid divisions. Right, and then I'm going to come over here and type in idle. And then I'm just going to drag in idle 1 and set it at 0, 0. So 0, 0 is right there. So if we are not moving or in any direction and we have no speed, we've just got this idle animation playing. Okay. Now let's do walk, or is it just, let's try walk. So like I say, we've only got one walk animation, walk forward. And this is going to be with your weapon not drawn. So we're just going to place that around there. Okay, and then we're just going to use that animation, that same animation, for the side. So just follow along with what I'm doing. Just play. So what this does is it obviously it blends between these animate. Oops, don't want to do that. Use this green one to move between them. Okay. And then I'm going to hit save. We might come back and set that up a little bit more, but I just want to get it quickly set up so we can see if this is working. So before we can do that though, we need to right click in the animation folder and create a animation blueprint, and it's for the custom arm skeleton. So if you just want to play around with this and you're just doing it with the basic setup that you start with, then you want to use this mannequin arm skeleton. Hit OK, and then this is player underscore anim underscore BP. Oops. Rename. Okay. Click on that. And let's go through this quickly. So the event blueprint update animation wants to cast to player BP, and the object wants to go into the try get pawn owner. Now as the player BP, we want to get velocity, which is going to tell us our forwards with our speed, the speed we're going at. Then we want to get actor forward vector, so this is going to be telling us if we're going forward, and then we want the get actor right vector, which is telling us our direction, because obviously the minus of right would be left, so that makes sense. Drag out from get velocity and type dot to get a dot product. That's going to combine these two variables for us. And then we're going to do the same here. So we're going to control CV. Now we've done this in a different order to what we normally do. The velocity wants to go in the top, the right get actor right vector wants to go there, because we haven't actually got those variables that we need to set up the next part. So in the animation blueprint, I want to go to the anim graph. The anim graph. So over on the left hand side, double click on the anim graph. Now you should have started in here, okay? So if you opened up your animation blueprint, you probably opened up in here. And the event graph is just here or down here. Okay, so you might need to just go back if you were stuck to where to navigate to. Right, so what we want to do here is we want to right click and we want to add new state machine, and we want to call this state machine locomotion. Right, and I'm going to plug the locomotion state into the output, and then I'm going to come here and I'm going to so I just double clicked on the locomotion state, and then I'm inside the state machine now, and I'm going to add a state, and this is going to be called idle / walk. Okay, and then we're going to open that up, and then we come to the asset browser here, and then scroll down to the bottom to grab the player blend space that we just created. Now we need to create two variables here, so just drag out of direction and hit promote to variable. If you can't see promote to variable for some reason, it's because you will have this context sensitive not ticked. So just make sure that's ticked, and then you'll be able to see that promote to variable. This top one wants to be called direction. This bottom one wants to be called speed. Right, so now we go back to the event graph because we have these variables. So drag out drag out speed first and hit set, and then drag out direction and hit set, and then plug those in with the arrows. And then this one, this first dot product goes into the speed because we're getting the velocity in the forward vector, so that's checking our forward speed. And this one's checking our velocity in our right vector, so that's checking the speed we're going in any direction. Right, hit compile, and you can see he's popped into his state there. Now he's got the gun in his hand there because that comes with a socket, but we haven't attached that yet, so that won't be in our player blueprint. So if we go back to our player blueprint, now if you have closed this for whatever reason, your player blueprint is in the player folder and then the blueprints folder. So we'll open that up, and then with the arms selected, just come over to anim class and select player anim BP and hit compile. And now we can check to see if this is looking right, which it is. So if I move left, right or forward, he just plays this walk animation. Okay, it doesn't matter. And that feels fine, it looks fine. But obviously we've got a bit of clipping here, so we need to just move this back slightly so we can avoid that clipping. Like that, perhaps. But now it's not. So this, again, it's just something you have to play around with. You know, it's no surefire way to set this up. It's just up to your personal preference as well. But what we want to think about when we're making a first-person shooter is that we leave what's called a combat corridor. Okay, so that's essentially a space in the middle of the screen around here where we aren't blocking the player's view, because that's where our reticule will be, and that's where our shots are going to go. So we want to make sure that we are leaving what they call the combat corridor, which is, like I say, in the center here, right? So we don't want to be blocking up this space with the gun. But we'll play around and you know, finesse that as we go. So let's add the gun. Now I'm using this set, and it's already come with loads of sockets. Okay, so if I go over here, if I click on the mesh and come over to sockets and hit the oh no, that's not right. Well, the way to do that then is, I think it comes with lots of sockets. Well, let's have a look. So with the first person arm selected, I'm going to come up here and I'm going to select a scene. Now a scene, what that does, it just adds a location, like a vector location in the game, that you can attach to sockets and stuff like that. So I'm going to call this gun location, and because that's inherited to the first person arms, now if I click on the sockets, I can get access to all the sockets that are part of the first person arms, including not just sockets. Oh look, they have a camera socket that's already set up that we could set up, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to leave and set up the camera on our own. So here we have a gun socket, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how to create a socket if you don't know how to do it. So what you would do is you would find where your skeletal mesh is. So in this case, it's in my first person assault pack. Meshes. No. Where is it? FPS arms, meshes, arms. Yeah, here it is. Now, if you're following along with a different pack, or you've got different weapons, a different skeletal mesh, it's fine, but you've just got to find this, and the picture will always look like this, okay? And it will say skeleton. So this is the actual skeleton that we'll be using, and you can't actually see it, but these are all the different bones that we have that control the rig. Now if you want to add your own socket, you just select a bone that you want to add the socket to. In this case it won't actually let me select it, but I can select them here. So all I'd need to do is the right hand. So if I just type in hand, yeah, so hand R, okay, and then you'd right click, you would add socket, then you would rename that whatever you want. I'm not going to now because I'm going to delete this in a second. And then you would right click on the socket, and then you'd add a preview asset to that socket. Again, I'm not going to do that because it will add it, and I don't want to do that just now. but then you would select the gun and then you would rotate it and size it to be exactly where you would want it to be. Also, if you're struggling to, because it's in this basic pose, what you can do is come up here to preview controller and then select use specific animation and then put it in one of its animations, hit pause, and then you'll find it easier to line up the gun to the pose. Okay, so that's if you don't have a socket already set up. That's really easy to do. So let's just close that down and go to the, we don't need the first, but we'll keep those open, but we don't need the first person character open. Okay, so we've got our gun location. We're going to attach that to the, you can see there's our hand socket that we didn't change the name of. We're going to change that to right hand gun socket, and with that scene location selected, so it's highlighted yellow, then come up here to add component and then add another skeletal mesh, and this time it's going to be the rifle, so SK rifle, and then that'll pop into the hands. Now I go over this in much more detail in the third person character tutorial, because we actually do add sword and shield with that, and we add the sockets, or we go through that entire process. So if you found that confusing, go back to the third person tutorial, and like I said, I go over that in much more detail, I think in like the third video or something like that, second or third. But really all it is placing a scene component and then attaching your either skeletal mesh. It's going to be a skeletal mesh in this instance because we're going to have animations on the gun when we reload and stuff like that. Right, so now that we've got that set up, let's have a look at that in game. Alright, that's looking good, and we've got our combat corridor fully available so that we're not blocking that, but I do think we need to move it over to the right slightly. So again, just for the not blocking that view that the player's going to need. Right, so what we're going to do, the last thing we're going to do in this video is we are going to set up the basic shooting so that we are actually firing something and we're doing a line trace. So in order to do that, let's go to our content folder, our player folder, and then open up our blueprint folder and then open up our player BP. Alright, so come over to the event graph. Now that's all our movement code, so we don't really need to touch that, that's the stuff we've pinched. But everything else we're going to be making custom. So what I want you to do is come up here and make a new function. Now what a function is a set of code that can be recalled multiple times. So you write it once and then you can call that function. It'll make sense when we go through it, and it won't take long. So I'm going to click a new function. I'm going to call that fire bullet, because this function is just going to deal with firing one bullet. But if we want to make an automatic weapon, we'll still be able to use this, but we'll loop it. Okay, so fire bullet, and we'll just do this in the most basic way for now. So what happens when I fire the bullet is that I want to do a line trace by channel. Make sure you get the line trace by channel, and make sure it's not a multi-line trace by channel. That's for if you want to be hitting multiple enemies at once, and if you're doing a sniper rifle you'd probably want that, but again this is a really basic way to set up a first person, basic but definitely robust, and it will work for smaller scale projects, game jams, things like that. Right, so, and it's also great for learning. You need to take these smaller steps before you can get to the more complex stuff. Okay, so we want a line trace by channel, but we've got to fill out some stuff here. We need a start and an end location. So for our start location, so what a line trace is it's invisible in the game, but we're going to make it visible for debugging. It's a line that will shoot out from the middle of the camera. Well, that's the way you can have it shoot out from anywhere, but we're going to use the middle of the camera, and it's going to go out for as long as you tell it to go out, and if it hits anything, you're going to be able to get information from that. If you've never seen a line trace before, this is really important stuff, and you'll be using it for a variety of different things. So the first thing we want to do is grab the camera, and we want to get world location of the camera, and then we want to drag off the camera again, and we want to get forward vector, and that's going to tell us the forward direction of the camera, and that's what we want. Now what we need to do is we need to times this by a float, and that's going to give us the length of our... So the start is obviously the start of the camera, and now we're going to times the forward vector, so the forward facing direction, by a float, which is a numerical value which will give us an amount to send out the cast or the line trace. Okay. So well, let's do that. Let's drag out and just hit Shift and 8, and that'll give us a multiply symbol. And we want a vector times a float, and I'm gonna, so this is a assault rifle, so its range is going to be pretty big, so I'm going to set that to 10,000. Pretty long, should I have said, not pretty big. And then what we're going to do, we're going to plus that with this. So all we need to do is drag out of there and hit plus on the keyboard, so Shift and plus, and then we want a vector plus a vector, and it's this vector plus the starting location, which is going to give us our end location, and just for the start we're going to come off the get world location. And what we're going to do, we're going to set the trace, leave that to visibility, and the draw debug type for duration, and then hit compile. And then if we now hit play, oh okay, so we've just, yeah, so that's just a function. So that all that does, we're not firing this at any point though. We've not told this anywhere to play this function. So what we've got to do is come back to our event graph. You can see we've got our fire bullet function open on this tab, or we can just find it here. If you're struggling to get back to your event graph, you can also get back to it through just clicking here on this event graph. Okay, and it will also tell you all your different input accesses, which I didn't know, but that's fantastic. So if you just wanted to go to the input jump, you could just go there, just jump to that. No pun intended. Right, so what we doing? So what we want to do is, there is already a fire input action set up in our setting. So I'm going to right click and I'm just going to type fire, and then we've got this action event here, and I'm going to click that. So when I press, and in this case it's the left mouse button, if you haven't got that and you need to set that up from scratch, you go to settings, project settings, you wait an age for it to load, and then you come over to the left hand side here, go to inputs, action mappings on this little drop down here, and you can see I've got this fire, and if I click on the drop down it'll tell me that it's left mouse button, gamepad right trigger, motion control trigger, Oculus touchpad button. So they've set it up for a bunch of different control options there. Generally I only do mouse control, keyboard and mouse controls and gamepad controls, so I don't really bother with these because I don't do much VR development, but maybe in the future. So that's how you would set a new one up, is just by clicking on here, and let's do that now actually, because we're going to need a reload. So I'm going to click on action mapping here, and I'm going to type in reload, and I'm going to set that to be on the keyboard and on R. Seems to make sense. Okay, so let's get back to what we were actually doing, but that's how you would do that. So with this input action fire, when I press it, what I want to do is I want to fire bullet. Okay, so now I only have to do that, and let's say I wanted to fire a bullet in a different occasion or scenario, then I wouldn't have to write that code again. I could just go fire bullet, and then every time I want to do that I can just use that function. Okay, so now if I hit compile and then hit play, you can see I am shooting out this red line. Now there is a problem here in that it doesn't match up with my crosshair. Now for years, literally years, I have not known how to fix this, but yesterday I figured out how to do it. Well, I saw somebody else do it and, you know, copied them. So let's go and do that. So you want to go into your, now the issue, let me just explain what the problem is. So the reason why the crosshair is a little bit lower than the center of the screen is because the projectile that is set up to aim is an actual projectile that has an arc. Okay, so it isn't being directed to exactly in the center of the screen. If you play around with the default gun, you'll notice obviously that it has an arc to the, it's more like a grenade launcher or something like that. But we want it to be directly in the center of the screen, because that's where we've set up our line trace to come from, directly from the center of our camera. So what we want to do is go to content, go to the first person BP, go to blueprints, and in here we've got this first person HUD. Click on that, and then we'll come here to the code that's dictating the HUD. Now, all that's really happening here is that when they receive an event to draw a HUD, which I assume is at the beginning of the game, they are checking to see if we've got a head-mounted display, but we don't need this because that's for VR. Now, if you just wanted to remove the crosshair, all you would do is remove that by holding Alt and clicking on that, and then you will have no crosshair at all. Okay, no crosshair. But we do want a crosshair. So what we're going to do is, now it's this code that's setting the screen X and screen Y position. As you can see here, what it's doing is it's getting the size X, dividing that by 2, size Y, dividing that by 2, so split it in half, and then it's plussing 20 to the Y, so that we're getting it to be a little bit higher or a little bit lower than center. So all we have to do is literally delete that, and then we should get it bang on in the middle. So now if I hit compile, oh, I've actually got to tell it to draw the draw again. So on true, just go into draw texture. I think it was off true. No, it must have been off false. Go back there. Draw texture, and again, you can change this texture to be whatever you want. So if you don't like this little red reticule, then you can change it. So now you can see our bullet is going directly to the location that we want, and the player expects. Okay, they expect the bullet to go to the reticule. So I think we'll leave it here for this video, and in the next one we'll start adding some maybe a reload, some bullets, and maybe we'll spawn a impulse so a radial force at the location the bullet hits, so that we can start getting some interactivity, and we might also spawn in an explosion, stuff like that, start playing around with particle effects. Okay, so I shall see you in the next one.